is of utmost importance that the church hold the line, that the church be able to proclaim with a prophetic voice from God's word the glory and the dignity of mothers. And I think that is needed today more than perhaps any other time in our lives. Church, it is vital for us to celebrate mothers. It is vital for us to recognize the glory and the dignity and the beauty of motherhood. Mothers, your calling, your vocation cannot be overstated. However, in our world, it is so often underappreciated. Godly mothers form and shape Christian culture more than anyone. More than anyone. More than any pastor, more than any politician, more than any theologian or artist or businessman or influencer or educator, mothers shape and form and influence this culture and the future culture of Christ and his people. No one has more influence over the future of the world than mothers. No one is able to shape future leaders more than mothers. Solomon says in Psalm 127, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children in one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. Fathers, you are to be the warriors that shoot out your children into this world when the time is right. However, mothers, in so many ways, you are the ones who fit and sharpen those arrows so that they are ready to be sent out. Through biblical teaching, through discipleship, through nurture and instruction, love and kindness, mothers, raise your children to be sharp arrows and not limp noodles. Because either way, it will be shot out into the world, but only one will do the sort of damage God has called them to do. Of all vocations, motherhood possesses the greatest threat to the powers of darkness. Out of all of them, the world is terrified of you mothers. You have to understand this. Now, I'm not sure if you have noticed, but the world in which we live in is in an all-out war against you. That cannot be denied. Nor should this surprise us, because God told us that this is the way it would happen. All the way back in the book of Genesis, in chapter 3, in verse 15, God says, speaking to the serpent, I will put enmity, that's strife, that's conflict between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall, or he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. You see, we so often think about the prophetic nature of this verse, which is good and right. Christ is the ultimate seed of the woman who crushes the head of the serpent. But we often forget the beginning part of this. I will put enmity between you and the woman. I will put strife. There will be conflict. The serpent will always try to destroy godly women. And this is a battle of deception. This is how the serpent won that first battle. He deceived the woman. And this is the nature of the fight from Genesis 3:15 all the way through till today. It is a battle of deception. And the culture that we find ourselves in is doing everything in their power to deceive and to snuff out the glory that God has given to moms. This is certainly true in the serpent-like agenda of the LGBTQIA plus movement. This is certainly true in the abortion industry. This is certainly true within feminist and woke ideologies that are all around us. The Stonewall organization claims that mothers should not be called mothers any longer. Instead, re-education is necessary so that mothers think of themselves as a parent who has given birth. Because the title mother is potentially triggering to the transgender community and an attack on their right to gender identification. The serpent-like culture that we live in views mothers or motherhood as a patriarchal burden that needs to be cast off. If you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not. In fact, just recently, the Welsh government deleted the term mother from its maternity policy. And following the election of our president, the word mother was removed from the rules of the House of Representatives, along with other overtly gendered terminology. And meanwhile, we look around in our world and we're hearing all of this news, all of this talk about mothers and men and children, and breastfeeding becoming chest feeding, mother's milk becoming chest milk, and pregnant women becoming birthing persons. That's really all you can do is laugh. Psalm 2, he says, "Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us burst their bonds apart, let's cast away their cords from us." And what does God in the heavens do? He points and he laughs and he holds them in derision. There's not much more that we could possibly imagine in our own minds and in our world today that is more ridiculous than what's going on in our world as it relates to the attack and the foolishness against mothers. However, my friends, this is the world that we live in. This is it. This is the world that we live in, whether we like it or not. We live in a world that will do everything in its power to sanitize and to impair the glory and the power that God has given to you, mothers. Everywhere you look, everywhere you go, there are lies. There is this war of deception that is coming against you. And it's easy for us to get used to the lies. It's easy for us to start to get so bombarded with the propaganda of absolute insanity that we begin to just kind of get dull to it. It's easy to become so entrenched with the lies and bombarded with the lies all around us, the deception that we hear through media and Hollywood and music and television and government education and periodicals and the culture and the workplace. This is an insane time to be alive. And at some point, you just kind of want to say, I'm done. Like, I don't want to hear it anymore. But the problem with that is once we begin to try to close our eyes, we begin to lose track of the truth. And this is the goal. There's so many lies bombarding you that it's so easy to lose track of the truth. That which you once held on to now seems, man, this is kind of difficult to hold on to. And compromise begins to set in. This is the path. This is the play. Once you start to lose track of the truth, you find yourself maybe not agreeing with the lies, but you find yourself beginning to accept the lies. And then once you start accepting the lies, the next and necessary step is you end up believing and celebrating the lies. Friends, you are bombarded with lies on what it is to be a mother. And we must not lose grip on the truth. That cannot happen here. That ideology, that way of thinking must not take root in your family or in this church. We must hold on to the truth no matter what. We must not give ourselves over to the lies. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, the simple step of a courageous individual is to not take part in the lie. The simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. We must not take part. We must hold on to the truth. We must not live by lies, but rather God has called us to be a people of the truth. We are a people who are guided by the beauty of God's design. We are a people who embrace God's call to motherhood as one of the greatest goods in all the world. Therefore, we must not take part in the lie. We must fight against the tactics that want to deceive us into thinking that motherhood is anything else other than what God has said it is. And it's so easy to fall into this trap. It's so easy to fall into this kind of culture of sanitized motherhood, of sanitized mommy culture that views moms more as victims in need of liberation than as a glorious vocation that ought to be embraced. It's easy to take place in the lie that motherhood is something that needs to be escaped from, or that motherhood is a necessary evil rather than a glorious vocation. These are the lies that you are all hearing constantly. And when we look at the scriptures, the very foundation of truth and beauty, we see that motherhood is something far more glorious. It is not something to be escaped, but it is something to be embraced. Biblical motherhood is clothed with strength and dignity and love and wisdom that guides children. We see throughout the pages of scriptures faithful mothers like Hannah, who pours out her heart in prayer, entrusting her child to the hands of God. We see brave mothers like Jochebed, who fearlessly fights against injustice and evil and tyranny to secure a future hope for her children. We see mothers like Ruth, who are bold in the faith, demonstrating loyalty and selflessness and unwavering commitment to her family, and thus leaving a lasting legacy. We see mothers like Lois and Eunice imparting to their children the knowledge of God's word, nurturing the faith and guiding their children in the truth. We see fierce mothers like Deborah, leading her children with wisdom and courage, standing firm in her faith and trust in God. Deborah is a fascinating woman in the Bible. In fact, she is who we will look at for the rest of our time this morning. Deborah is an example for all women. She is an example not only for mothers, but certainly for mothers. She is an example for single women. She is an example for daughters and sisters. She is an example for wives. She is an example of what all women ought to aspire to be like. She is a wife. She is a mother. She is godly. She is wise. She is a leader. She empowers those around her, and she raises up a generation to follow the Lord. The story of Deborah is found in Judges chapter 4. Judges chapter 4. And Judges 4:4 is where we will start. And it tells us that Deborah is a prophetess, a wife, and a judge. It says, now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Libidoth, was judging Israel at that time. Now, at that time, essentially, Israel is in all sorts of turmoil because the Canaanite onslaught, led by the evil king Jabin, is unrelenting. They are under attack constantly. Things are unsettled in Israel, and Israel has forgotten how to fight. And Deborah, a prophetess, a wife, and a judge, was ruling and judging in Israel at this time. Now, it might seem strange to us to think about this woman, Deborah, being called a prophetess or a judge. It might seem kind of odd when it hits our ears. However, that shouldn't be the case. And the reason for that is because God has made men and women different, from top to bottom, inside and out. Men and women are completely different. And you see, God has not designed men and women to compete for some roles in his divine economy. Now, contrary to the social imaginary of our day, when we look at parenthood, you don't have male parents and female parents or birthing people. You have fathers and you have mothers. Two very separate and unique roles. It is not just this category of parent that can be filled by a man or a woman, but rather you have fathers and you have mothers. You don't have this category of spouse, where you have a male spouse and a female spouse or a partner. You have husbands and you have wives. And that's it. And this is key, because each of these categories, each of these roles, these callings are completely unique. They are not the same, just expressed from different genders, but rather it is unique. It's a specific role. So when it comes to the role of prophet, you don't have a female prophet and a male prophet. You have a prophet and you have a prophetess. Two completely different roles that are assumed, one by a man and one by a woman. And we see prophetesses all throughout the scripture. Deborah, of course, being one. Miriam, Huldah, and Anna are all prophetesses. You see the same thing with deacons. The deacon or the diaconate is not one category that is assumed by either a man or a woman, but you have deacons and you have deaconesses, right? You have kings and you have queens. You have judges and you have judgesses. This is how God has designed it. It's not one role that is fought for and whoever wins out, like in the corporate world, assumes the title. In God's economy, he has a unique, beautiful, glorified position for women and for mothers. And you know, the only office that we really see in God's economy that doesn't have a female counterpart is the role of priest. You have priests, but you don't have priestesses, at least certainly not within the covenant people of Israel. And the priest corresponds to the modern day pastor and elders. So, we should not be surprised to see Deborah as a judgess because this is what God does. But we should pay close attention to see how she images God uniquely in a different way than Ehud or Samson. She is a judgess in a very different role. She images God in ways that male judges do not. And the most obvious of that is the fact that God raised up Deborah to be a mother in Israel. Judges 5, verses 6 and 7 says this: In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were abandoned and travelers kept to the byways. The villagers ceased in Israel. They ceased to be until I arose. I, Deborah, arose as a mother in Israel. So at this point, everything is a mess in Israel. The Canaanites, the lies of the culture have come in and fractured everything apart to the point where people weren't even traveling on the normal roads, but they're taking byways. They're going on the side paths to avoid conflict. Things are not going well until Deborah arose as a mother in Israel. At this time, Israel is without any leadership. They don't know how to fight, and they are deceived by the lies of the culture. So what does God do? He provides them with a mother. And God's plan was for this mother, as all mothers are to do, is to raise up a godly generation, a generation that would follow God and not give themselves over to the lies of the culture. This is what godly mothers do. They raise up sons and daughters to fear God and to be men and women that God has called them to be. This is what God has called you to as mothers, to raise up a godly generation. God has given you the call to raise up sons. Sons to be kings who are not enslaved to anything. Not enslaved to vices or women or wine, to be kings who do not give their strength to a woman, to be men who speak and act on behalf of the weak, to discern and judge rightly, to defend the poor and the needy, to be strong and to be courageous, to act like men. And he's called you to raise your daughters, to open their mouths with grace and wisdom, with kindness always coming forth, to love and to submit to their husbands, to dress herself with strength and to make her arms strong, to create a home for hospitality, to not be afraid, but to clothe herself in strength and dignity and laugh at the time to come. Mothers, teach your daughters that charm is deceitful, beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Deborah taught these virtues as a mother in Israel to the people of Israel. Judges 4:5 says, she used to sit, speaking of Deborah, she used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. So she had this place of honor sitting underneath this tree to give wisdom, to give advice, to help young mothers and old mothers, to help young men and old men know how to follow God rightly and faithfully, how to raise children to fear the Lord, how to think through political strategy and wartime tactics. This is the sort of role that Deborah played. And we see this playing out. In verses 6 and 7, it says, she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam, from Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? So she's reminding Barak of what God has said to him. Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you? This is what mothers do. Has not God told you to do this? Has not God sent you forth? Has not God called you to something particular, something special, something consistent with his character? This is what she does to Barak, her spiritual son in the faith. Has not the God of Israel commanded you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun, and I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with his chariots and his troops, and I will give him into your hand. Hasn't God told you that, Barak? Didn't he say this to you? Notice that Deborah here does not say that the Lord has promised to give Jabin or Sisera or the Canaanite army into her hands. That's what happened with the other judges. The Philistines were given over to the hands of Samson and so on. But she's not interested in that, but rather she points to Barak. Deborah is not the one that's going to go out and fight, but rather God is giving the enemy into the hands of her spiritual son. This is a mother's calling. This is a mother calling her son to be a man, to trust God, and to lead the people to war as God has called him to do. This is what you do. You call your children to trust God, follow God, do what he has commanded you to do. So how does Barak, her son, respond? Verse 8, Barak said to her, if you will go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. Barak's faith is weak here. He's not a coward. This isn't cowardice. He knows that the Lord will fight. He knows that he is able to go and fight. And as we will see in just a few moments, he does quite well when he goes and fights. However, his faith is weak. His faith is questioning if his mother is not by his side, will God really go before him? He's willing to fight, but there's a sense of security with his mom there. So, how does Deborah respond? Verse 9, and she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. So here, Barak receives a soft rebuke, saying, okay, son, I will go with you, but you have to realize that this is not the best plan. This is not to your glory. And we know that as kids, if mom's too close by, even kids kind of lose glory if mom has to do it for him. And this is true in God's economy as well. Deborah tells Barak, listen, I will go, but this is going to be kind of an issue because the Lord was going to give Sisera, the enemy, the serpent figure of this story, into your hands. But because you have decided to go this other path, needing me to go with you, we're going to see Sisera handed over into the hands of a woman. So, who is this woman that Deborah is speaking of? We will see that the woman is Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite. But we'll get to her in just a few moments. So Barak decides to go to war. He gathers his 10,000 men and went to face Sisera with Deborah by his side. And when Sisera hears that Barak is on the move, he gathers together his 900 chariots of fire and the men that were with him, and he goes out to war. Verse 14 says, and Deborah said to Barak, up, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hand. Does not the Lord go out before you? So Barak went from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. We see Deborah reminding Barak that the Lord goes before you, that the Lord will give victory to you, that the Lord will fight against Sisera. And this time, Barak believes and does not question. His faith is stronger. He goes forth with his 10,000 men and goes to war. Verse 15, and the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army before Barak by the edge of the sword. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled away on foot. So Yahweh goes before him. Barak is going with his 10,000 men, his mother's command at his back saying, go. And he goes, and it is a complete devastation of Sisera and his armies. It is a supernatural victory. The Lord goes before them and confuses the people. They don't know which way is up. And you can see Sisera riding on his chariot saying, we are being slaughtered in a way that doesn't seem natural. So yeah, that's right. The Lord was doing it. So Sisera pulls back on the reins and says, I'm out. He jumps down off of his chariot and runs off. Verse 16, and Barak pursued the chariots and the army of Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the armies of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not a man was left. The Lord gave Barak the victory. He was blessed for listening to the words of Deborah. It is a complete and utter victory. No questions asked. Except for the one nagging question of what happened to Sisera. He ran off. The rest of his armies died. So where did Sisera run off to? Verse 17, but Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. For there was peace between Jabin, the king, and Hazor, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber the Kenite. So Heber and Jabin, there was peace, there was an allegiance. Because actually what happened is Heber's family actually apostatized from the people of God, the covenant people. He was a part of Israel, and he left, denying the faith, and he joined teams, if you would, with the Canaanites. And so there was an allegiance between him and Jabin. So when Sisera is running away, he comes to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. So he's thinking to himself, there's an allegiance here. Everything's going to be good. I'm going to be safe. He thinks he has refuge. Verses 18 through 20 says, and Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord. Turn aside to me. Do not be afraid. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you, is anyone here, just say no. At first reading, it seems that this passage indicates that Jael is actually trying to take care of Sisera. She is trying to submit to her pagan husband who hates the people of God in order to take care of the general of this Canaanite army. This is what it seems. However, what we will see is Jael deceiving Sisera so that she might crush the head of this serpent figure. Now remember, the first conflict going all the way back to the garden is a conflict of deception. It is the serpent who deceived Eve. And because of this deception, there's enmity, there is strife. This is the battle. It's a battle of deception. However, what we see playing out throughout the scriptures is It's not only the serpent who is able to deceive, but women have a reputation of righteously deceiving the enemies of God. This is a good thing. The women repeatedly throughout the scriptures deceive serpent figures, and it's oftentimes to save the woman's offspring from being destroyed. And we see this with Sarah when she deceives Pharaoh, or Rebekah when she deceives Abimelech, or Rachel deceiving Laban, or the Hebrew midwives deceiving the Pharaoh, or Rahab deceiving the men at Jericho, or Michael deceiving Saul, or Esther deceiving Haman. In each of these cases, there's a sort of poetic justice of shrewd women who outwit the serpent figures in order to see victory, beating the serpent at his own game. So here, Jael is following in the faithful footsteps of many who have come before her and outwitting and righteously deceiving Sisera. Come inside, she says. It will be safe. Everything will be fine. Don't be afraid. Here, let me cover you with this rug. You can kind of hide there. He asks for water, and she goes, oh, I'll get you something to drink, but I'm going to give you some milk instead. Maybe this will help you fall asleep. He thinks that she is keeping guard over him as he sleeps, yet what Sisera does not know is Jael is faithful to Yahweh. And this daughter of Eve is about to crush the head of this serpent. So here lies Sisera asleep in Jael's tent, completely unaware of what is about to take place. So, verse 21, Jael, the wife of Heber, takes a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. It's a fitting end. This action was the fulfillment of Deborah's prophecy, telling her son Barak that this road that you're choosing is not one of glory, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to the hands of a woman. And this woman, of course, is Jael. Now, for generations after, the people of God have sung songs about Deborah and about Jael. In fact, Judges chapter 5 is the song of Deborah. And Deborah says concerning Jael in verse 24, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women, most blessed. Most blessed. Most blessed of women, she says. This is a title that is only given to Mary, the mother of the ultimate snake crusher. So here we see God's faithfulness to his promises, all the way back in Genesis 3:15, that the offspring of the woman would crush the head of the serpent. This is an incredible story that shows the posture, the godliness, the fierceness of women and mothers. We see God's faithfulness to his promises played out in the life of Deborah. We see Deborah as the mother of Israel who raises up a generation that trusted in the Lord and warred against the evil powers. We could see this story played out as Deborah being the mother of Israel in a very real way, Barak being her son and Jael being her daughter. This is the sort of influence that mothers have, calling her children to go forth, to follow the Lord, to be faithful to Yahweh no matter what. No matter what lies come in, no matter what influences are in your life, at the end of the day, we are to raise a generation that follows Jesus to the end. No matter what, no matter the cost. My friends, the church needs mothers like Deborah and women like Jael. Mothers who are able to lead as God has called and designed them to lead. Mothers who do not live by lies, but rather fully embrace the beauty and the glory and the fierceness of motherhood. Mothers who will raise the next generation to be strong in the faith, lovers of truth and beauty, and have the courage to follow Christ as he goes before us. We need women and mothers, daughters and sisters who empower men to fight as God has called them to fight. Mothers and wives who empower men to lead as God has called them to lead. This is a glorious calling, and it's one that we as a church must never lose our grip on. We must always hold up high the glorious vocation of motherhood, because apart from it, everything falls apart. And we must protect our women, protect our wives, protect our daughters and our sisters and our friends. Protect them from the lies that are bombarding them every single day. Men, you hear lies, but you don't hear it how the ladies hear it. It's different. We need to be better Adams who will not allow the women in our life to be deceived by the serpent. And sisters in Christ, this is what God has called you to. This is what he is leading you to. Look to Deborah, look to Jael, and don't be afraid to raise a generation of boys and girls that will crush the head of the serpents and follow the Lord into the fight no matter what. Let's pray.